Tonight, we have with us Irshad Raihan, Director of Product Marketing at RedHat Cloud Storage and Data Services. He specializes in digital demand generation, data-driven marketing, etc. Irshad holds an MBA from Carnegie Mellon University and Masters in Computer Science from Clemson University. He is based in North California and is an avid cyclist. Irshad, it's a pleasure and privilege to have you with us. Welcome. And before I hand this session over to you, let's run a quick poll here. So let's see what comes to your mind when you hear the term product leader. It's very simple. Scan this QR code and go to Slido and enter what comes to your mind when you hear the term product leader. Now, the URL is available on your chat window also. This is important to continue our webinar tonight. So please go ahead, do it immediately. I'm not sure if you're finding any difficulty in doing this, please. Yeah, I can see some responses. You can scan this QR code. It's pretty simple. Or find the Slido URL on your chat window. Come on, we have many people here. We don't need just 2 responses. Please go ahead. This is important for the webinar tonight. That's interesting. Irshad, would you like to come live on video?
Hi, Manika. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And thanks to everyone for joining today. Thanks for all of our viewers who are joining in from the live stream. This is fantastic. I really appreciate the IPL team for this opportunity. And some really interesting responses coming in. Fascinating. So that's actually a great place for us to start the conversation today. The role of the product leader. I'm just watching some of these this sort of word cloud being built out. It's really interesting to see many facets of a product leader being called out. I'm seeing everything from you really got to know your product, the product geek, the SME, all the way to customer service, which is really good to see that as product leaders, each of you are thinking about the customer and thinking in terms of how people actually use your product. Product CEO, I think, is a great response because you are a product owner at the end of the day. You are a problem solver as well. Obviously, you're a visionary. Learning is another one. Growth engine. Solution architect, end all and be all is an interesting one as well. Expert, right? So you've hit a lot of different sort of aspects of what it takes to be a product leader. And if I could screen share here, let me know if
yes, perfect.
If you're all able to see the. Okay, perfect, cool. So. Again, appreciate the opportunity, Manika, and thanks for the setup here. I think that's a great question to get us set up, and we will be asking the same question at the end of the presentation as well, just to be able to see, if there's any sort of change in perspective in the way that you see your role as product leaders. There's multiple ways to think about this, right? There's no wrong answers here, obviously. And I really enjoyed the responses. And I think if you started to sort of categorize each of those responses, you could sort of neatly fill them into each of these 4 boxes. There's obviously a creative side of the product leader. There's also a critical side, right? As a product leader, we have to constantly ask ourselves, are we headed down the right path? Are we looking at the right data? Are we planning for the future? Are we ensuring customer success? There's also curious, right? Many of you are probably engineers, and in the IT space, you might recognize that symbol as being the symbol for agile development, where you would make basically take an iterative model, take small steps, fail fast, as they say, and iterate quickly, learn quickly, and adapt as you go along. So using that sort of agile model, it's really interesting to see how many engineers have eventually landed into product leaders, right? So it really appeals to that part of our brains. And then finally, champion, right? This is the person that gets it done. Again, this is not a framework that I came up with, but it is a framework that we will use for the rest of the presentation today. So if you look at the top right of your screen, you'll see the same icons represented there, and you'll see those spread across the rest of the presentation, just to give you a little bit of a sense for which aspects of the product leader that we're going to tilt towards on that particular discussion. So we're going to have a lot of fun today. What's more fun than a surfing dog in a luau garland, right? We are going to talk about a number of topics. As Manika said, we would love for you to engage with us, whether it's through the live stream. We have some polls through the presentation as well. We are, as the title and abstract suggests, we are going to focus our discussion today here on segmentation and a very closely related topic, personas. We're going to get into a couple of tools that I think might be interesting for you as product leaders: storytelling and marketing technology, or Martech, as the kids like to say today. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a bow and talk about how all of this relates to the customer journey. Now, in as much as it's important to list what we are going to talk about, it's important to talk about what we aren't going to cover today. And this is actually, it's a bit of a metaphor, right? Because when you think about customer segmentation, realizing which customer segments we aren't going to target is almost as important as the ones that we are. So I wanted to lay that out today, just so that we can frame the problem statement. The first thing we are not going to cover is B2C, right? B2C is a fascinating space for a marketer, for a product leader. It is much more, in my opinion, much more complex, much more nuanced, and it has, there's a lot more pressure simply because the expectation from a product leader in a B2C product it's much higher expectation in terms of product experience and feedback. And it's a much faster loop from customer to product and back. So we are not going to cover those scenarios. Each of these actually could make a possible future webinar topic. Transactional marketing, right? The idea that, you have a customer, you have a single transaction at a point of sale, and life goes on, right? What we're talking about here is lifetime value of a customer, right? Growing customers, renewing customers, deeper share of wallet, that kind of thing, which is why segmentation really, really matters. Privacy implications. I mean, again, goodness, how much of the news cycle is filled with things like GDPR, and I live in California, and California has its own set of privacy regulations, and this is very important as a product leader, as a marketer, making sure that inadvertently we are not crossing the line in terms of privacy implications, but we are not going to go there today. And finally, Martech recommendations. As you can tell, as Manika mentioned, I work for RedHat. We do work with a number of marketing technologies, and I may mention one or two, but in no way is any of that an endorsement or recommendation around those technologies. All right, so let's get into the meat of what we want to talk about here. I love the model of why, how, and what. Always start with the why. So why customer segmentation? I think intuitively, all of us understand customer segmentation, but it's important, I think, to at least set up a little bit of a baseline in terms of why we do it. And the most important reason that marketers like to do customer segmentation is consistency, right? It's a nice, easy, consistent way to think about what an engineer would call equivalence classes, right? The idea that everyone in this group behaves in a certain way, whether it's based off the way that they interact with your product, their pain points, the way that they see the world, whatever it is. But the idea is that you can apply with some level of consistency a treatment to that segment of customers. The other topic that is really close to my heart is scale. As a marketer, as a product leader, we should always be thinking about scale. Scale is a day zero and it's a day N concept, right? It's not something that should be added on as your company and your brand evolves. It's something that you should be planning for from day one. And if you think about demand gen as one aspect of how you would implement and manifest your product leadership, thinking about scale and ensuring that that there's consistency as your brand and as your product scales across geographies. It's very consistent. Finally, negative targeting. Back to the point I made earlier about knowing what you're not going to target is almost as important as what you are going to target. It really helps in terms of clarity from both your own seller network as well as your partner network. And finally, this thing called account-based marketing. How cool is that? I mean, that is something that is really taken off in the past decade or so. And it's the idea that it's the Pareto principle, right? It's being able to apply 80% of your marketing effort to the 20% of customers and really give them a very customized experience as opposed to the long tail of customers. They're also important, of course, but account-based marketing is directly linked to customer segmentation. If you get your segments right and you can focus your ABM efforts on the right segments, you are in great shape. All right, so let's get some definitions out of the way. You may have seen things like market segmentation, typical figure on the left, right, where you have things like enterprise customers, mid-market, sort of the long tail of SMB, enterprise customers typically, deeper pockets. Those are the ones that you really want to have that sort of long-term relationship with because renewals are key. And there's different ways of dealing with this sort of pyramid. Again, shouldn't be new to any of you on the call today. On the right is more of a customer segmentation model, right, where this becomes much more personal. This is about personas. It's about people. It's about users. It's about the way that folks interact with your product, right? What we're going to be talking about today is somewhat of a hybrid model, right? One of the things to consider is that the same title in, let's say, an enterprise customer and an SMB customer could actually have vastly different needs, right? What I mean by that is, think about an IT manager and an enterprise company. An IT manager probably has armies of people, and their pain points with a vendor are probably related to the overall customer service, right? Am I going to get fired if I went with a particular vendor, right? It's more about the relationship. For an SMB, they don't have the luxury of armies of people, and therefore for them it's much more time to value, right? It's much more I have a credit card, I want to be able to use something as a service, run analytics or whatever the need of the hour is, and it's the same role but vastly different personas, effectively, depending on which segment they are in. So again, part of what we want to do here is keep things interactive. So here's an opportunity for us to do a quick poll, right? The question is, which of these methods of segmentation is used the most often by your company, right? So the idea is, what are you seeing today that is in practice, right? This is not meant to be a theoretical exercise. I'll give you the options here, right? It's not an open book quiz, and really there's no wrong answers, right? The idea is, we want to be able to think about, are we using what we call firmographics? So the sort of equivalent in the B2C world would be demographic segmentation. So really what we would call a priori data, company size, which vertical you're in, what kind of revenue you have. Role-based segmentation is a little bit more persona-based, right? So title, seniority, how do they evaluate your product? A needs-based segmentation, so pain points, what do they expect from your product? Again, different people expect different things. Buyer sophistication, this is an important one too, is the idea that you might have super users, you might have the user that just needs something to work and they don't need to see all the inner workings, and you have everything in the middle. Value-based segmentation is really, what does the customer bring in, right? What is their lifetime value, and what kind of budgets do they have available to them? And finally, decision-based segmentation. So what kind of influence do they exert over the decision-making process? And also, how centralized or decentralized is that decision-making process? In other words, how much stress do we lay on a particular individual to get them over the line, right? So I think we have about, I'd say we have majority of the votes coming in. So it's, let's see, we have, we've crossed 80%. So interesting to see. what we're seeing trending right now is there seems to be pretty much a clear winner, which is value-based segmentation. The idea that you want to be able to segment customers based off of how how they sort of interact and how what kind of revenue potential they bring in to your company, as well as what kind of budgets they have available to them. And it's a tie with needs-based segmentation. So let's keep that in mind as we go into the next poll here. So this is fantastic, and I appreciate the interaction here. All right, so the next poll is related to let's see if yeah, perfect. So Manika has it up again. So it's the same set of questions. Apologies, same set of answers. The question is slightly different this time. The question is, which of these methods of segmentations offers the most accuracy for product leaders, right? So you can define accuracy in different ways, right? You can think of it as, how are we able to consistently apply a particular segmentation model? And we get anecdotal feedback from customers, you get feedback from the field, you see the message resonating with customers, you see marketing execution, sales results, customer satisfaction. There's a number of ways to measure that accuracy, right? But as a product leader, you have a very intuitive sense for which is the one that offers the most accuracy for you as a product leader. So let's see, we're coming into about 65%. Let's wait till about 80%, and then we'll see how things go. So there's a few, if you haven't voted yet, if you wouldn't mind putting in your vote. And again, there's no wrong answers, right? At the end of the day, I mean, the simple answer is that we are going to use all of these data points, right? What we're trying to ascertain here is which one might be, where do we want to put most of our heft around from a cognitive aspect. So it looks like needs-based segmentation is a clear winner here. So interesting, interesting anecdote right there, right? When we asked what is the one used by your company, we had a tie between value and needs. And when we asked what should we be doing, in other words, if you had it your way, let's say, what is the one that you would use? You clearly identified needs, right? So right there's a lesson for all of us, right? As product leaders, we have an opportunity to change that, right? We have an opportunity to go back to our bosses and really spread this culture that needs-based segmentation is where it's at. And I completely agree with you, by the way, right? 39% is fantastic, right? Again, which is not to say that there's any one particular right answer. It is going to be an amalgamation of these things, but there's a reason that that those of you who voted for needs-based segmentation really see it as the key here. And let's talk a little bit about that. All right. So the first thing I'll say is that needs drive buying behavior, and they also drive market behavior. And that's the reason that we absolutely need to be maniacally focused on customer needs, right? And it's a little trickier than simply stating that we need to understand customer needs. But I'll start with this. Remember the four aspects of customer segmentation when we said the why behind customer segmentation. Needs-based customer segmentation actually helps each of those four. So you're already in good company that if you understand the needs of your customer and you're focusing on that, which is not to say you're ignoring the others, but when in doubt, you are pivoting and you're making some big bets from a product standpoint, from a sales motion standpoint, from a partnership standpoint. You're making some big bets based on needs, right? If there's one thing you take away as product leaders, that's what I want you to take away, is to infect, if that's a topical word right now, right? The rest of your company with that needs-based culture, because needs really tie not just needs for today, but you're thinking holistically. You're thinking about what is happening in the landscape, right? How often? I mean, history is full of examples of great technologies, absolutely great execution, great leaders, but they did not see the bigger picture, and they did not see an alternative that was available to customers, right? And if you were able to understand the needs of your customer and tie that in, and also understand trigger events, right? For each of your personas, there's a certain event that causes them to purchase or renew or not renew, right? Understanding those trigger events, that's part of understanding needs-based segmentation as well. And finally, as you think about customer references, that's probably one of the fastest and strongest way to really grow your customer base is when you have customers that are properly segmented and that are segmented by needs. It's much easier then for other customers to pick up on those stories and understand how it applies to them. Now, a couple of caveats there, right, is that needs change, right? And so there is an aspect of being able to predict customer needs. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And finally, here's an interesting one, right? So it is somewhat antithetical to what we have just talked about, right? Is you have to trust what customers do. And sometimes it's not because they're lying to you. It's just sometimes because, think about NPS as a good example, Net Promoter Score. We may be talking to different personas, right? Again, going back to the model of enterprise versus SMB. As an enterprise customer, you might be talking to customers that value relationship a lot more. And perhaps you're missing out on people that are actually giving you really important, critical feedback about your product, and you're ignoring it because the NPS score looks good, right? And the reverse might be true. You might be undervaluing your service because you're only pivoting and skewing it toward a certain type of user as opposed to looking at customers holistically, right? So the way to combat that is definitely cast a wider net in terms of the user. So everything from procurement, every touch point with your product is an important touch point, and a weighted average of those opinions is very important. Telemetry, if you have the luxury of that, right? In a subscription economy, many B2B companies have the luxury of actually getting live usage data from their customers. And that's the purest form of product usage data, right? Because again, this is back to what customers do and not what they say, not because they're lying to you, but because sometimes they may lack the perspective. But telemetry data does not lie. So being able to work in telemetry data into your segmentation model is extremely important. All right, so let's talk a little bit about best practices here. As you're thinking about building out your personas for your customer segments, what does that look like? Here's a few rules of thumb. The first thing I always say is think in terms of achieving business goals, right? Are your segments aligned to the use cases for your products? And what this helps is product managers and engineers understand users better, right? How many times have you had a great product with a really bad user experience? And when I say user experience, I don't mean just GUI, right? It sounds like there's a session coming up later in the week around user experience, right? And so you'll definitely be able to dive into that later. But think more holistically about the entire end-to-end user experience, right? The other aspect is your segments and your personas should certainly depict current state, which is very important if you need to get any kind of credibility from sales. But at the same time, you have to leave room for evolution, right? This is where, as the title of this presentation suggests, the new personas, right? There's always evolving personas. And as a product leader, it behooves you to bring in that market perspective for your engineers and others who are actually building the product. The second one is improve customer experience, right? The segments that we come up with, the personas that we come up with, need to be aligned to the way that sales goes to market and that the field marketing folks really go and execute your marketing tactics, right? Depending on the size of company you may have, tens to hundreds, even thousands of field marketing people. So going back to that idea of consistency, right? If you can consistently build a segmentation model that every seller, I call it the 2 a.m. rule, right? You wake them up at 2 a.m. and you tell them what are the customer segments, what are the 3 things that really matter to a segment, and they rattle off the same thing. That's when you know you've done your job at building out these segments, right? So it's also about crossover job functions, right? So DevOps is a great example of this. 15, 20 years ago, we didn't have DevOps, right? We had Dev, that was the developer world, and you had Ops, the folks that kept the lights running. And now you have this sort of amalgamation of the two. It's an interesting persona, right? Simply because there's actually not that many people who have DevOps on their resume or their their business card. However, they are exactly serving a DevOps function, which makes personas and segmentations a lot more tricky. And then you have variations, right? DevSecOps, right? So the folks, you add in the security angle to it. And then, of course, you have things like AI ops that has nothing to do with DevOps, but sounds a lot like DevOps, right? The idea that, really understanding this sort of crossover and this sort of evolution of personas is going to be very key. And also clarifying negative targeting. Again, we use a sort of a red, yellow, green model where for your sellers, you basically give them a heat map and you say, stay away from these use cases. The customer says XYZ. If they're looking for certain aspects that are product, and that's not a strength for our product and we're going to lose all day, walk away from that. In fact, your customers would appreciate that as well. Now, one thing before I get into the last sort of pillar here is as product marketers and as marketers in particular, we are incentivized to think about optimizing marketing spend, right? And that is the exact wrong way of going about all of this, right? Think about improving customer experience. Think about achieving business goal. The rest will follow, right? Look, if you want to optimize marketing spend, some people use return on marketing investment, ROMI. Don't spend anything, right? You got infinite ROI. But to some extent, I've seen marketers game the system a little bit to make the numbers look better. But really, that's a fool's errand, right? Because you're not helping either improve customer experience or achieve business goals, and you'll be called out at the end of the day. So you're much better off. Even if the numbers don't look great today, you're much better off having a consistent set of metrics that will improve customer experience and achieve business goals, and then work backwards into improving that ROMI score over time. From a marketing perspective, from a ROMI perspective, having a clear understanding of the spheres of influence, right? So many of you must be using the model of decision makers versus influencers, right? And understanding how much influence goes back to that decision-based segmentation at the end. Sprinkle in the flavor of that. Also leave room for geographic customization, right? So, you may have a corporate marketing team that builds out some of these personas, but each geography might be a little bit different. And finally, build in route to market recommendations. We'll talk about this at the end as well. And this idea is very simple, right? As you build out your segments, not all segments may be important, but not all segments may be serviceable by your company, right? So you have to sprinkle in the reality of what is possible from an execution standpoint as well. And so as a marketer, as a product leader, it's important that you build in those route to market recommendations. Perhaps it's a segment that's better served by a global system integrator or another type of reseller or VAR. And having that recommendation that this is an opportunity to partner rather than go on your own is an important recommendation. Finally, I'll leave you with a little tidbit around personas. So in general, again, this is a rule of thumb, I'd probably say 2 to 4 distinct needs-based personas are about ideal. If you have just one, and there are companies that have just one, and they're very niche companies, right? They solve a very specific problem, and that's important to customers. But I would say that's an outlier. If you have 5, that's an outlier as well. You're in dangerous territory. You're not quite in the red zone, but anything more than 5, that's a red flag, and that's an indication you should go back to the drawing board and rethink. And perhaps there's a different way of slicing things up, or perhaps there's a new piece of data that might be interesting for you to help bring it back under that. Like I said, that the sweet spot is 2 to 4. Okay, so we've talked about what good personas look like. We added a teaser in the title of the presentation about new personas, right? So let's talk a little bit about those. As the picture here suggests, these are the kingmakers, right? And in the new subscription economy, these are extremely important personas that perhaps could get overlooked, perhaps ignored, perhaps you're dealing with them, but maybe not completely leveraging the power that they exert over the purchasing decision. The first one is communities. Obviously, RedHat is an open source company, so communities are our bread and butter, right? That's how most of our customers, or many of our customers, start off with actually using the purely free software out of the community, and then they eventually become RedHat customers. But even outside of the open source model, it's important to understand that and communities could mean many things, right? There's technology communities, there's enthusiasts, There's folks that are sort of on the fringe of your customer base, and there's communities that each of your practitioners belong to. But it's important to understand that as a shadow persona, the power that the community exerts and being able to very delicately influence the communities, and not in a way to monetize necessarily, but in a way to educate, right? We'll get into this a little bit later as well, where you want to have empathy for these communities. You really want to understand what drives them, why they engage in certain activities. I mean, this is they're doing this in their free time, right? So it takes a lot of motivation for them to engage, and what keeps them going. But leveraging the power of communities is important. Again, this slide could be another sort of topic in of itself, because it's a really cool area. This whole idea of freemium users, right? This is becoming you think about the Spotify model, for instance, right? How do you take the user that is basically a free user? And this is a highly contentious, highly debated topic, right? Some people just absolutely don't believe in the power of freemium. Others think it's a great way to on-ramp customers. And it's about how much you add into the free model and how you incentivize customers to move from free to the premium model. But freemium users offer you amazing telemetry, right? They're telling you, they're leaving all this digital exhaust that is so useful for you to go in and mine and understand what kind of users. And actually, they can be very valuable from a segmentation point of view as well. Inverted users, right? This is a new one, perhaps. This is the idea that, let's take developers as an example. A lot of enterprise companies, that's the flavor of the month, right? In the past, a lot of the sort of technology giants, they focused on the admin persona, right? And in the last decade or so, they've definitely trained their efforts onto the developer persona. However, developers have in some ways actually inverted the classic marketing funnel, right? Where you would start off with a high-level solution brief, then perhaps as you move to the awareness and decision phases, you're dealing with a little bit more of a sort of next level of detail. Then you go to perhaps a POC phase, and then you have the final sale. Developers have inverted that funnel, right? They actually want to download your product. They want to use it. You maybe have 4 to 6 minutes to wow them. And if not, it's switching cost is near to zero, and they'll move on to the next thing, right? They want to be associated with a cool brand. They want to keep their resumes updated. And so there's a lot of tactics that are vastly different in terms of acquiring these inverted users than we might have had in the past. So keeping that in mind is extremely important. And finally, influencers, right? We see this in the B2C world. It's a much more complex set of influencers in Instagram or Snapchat that are, one tweet could be worth millions of dollars to a brand because of the power that some of these influencers exert. We don't quite have that sort of rock star appeal in the B2B world, but know that there are influencers both within your customers that probably have nothing to do with the customer journey, that will probably never show up on a heat map, but they are very important influencers. So understanding that and adding that into your personas in your segmentation is going to be key as well. So, we've talked a lot about building personas, what good personas look like, shadow personas. I want to leave you with a couple of tools before we end today, right? And I think, one of these tools will appeal to the right side of your brain. One of these tools will appeal to the left side of your brain. And going back to our initial, what does a product leader look like? It looks like, we are all really well-rounded on the left and right side. So I think I think you'll enjoy this. So the first one is storytelling, right? If there's maybe the next 5 minutes, if you want to really take away something from this presentation, folks, I'd say pay attention for the next 5 minutes, right? I think storytelling is probably one of the most powerful tools that we have as product leaders, and yet it's probably one of the least used and the ones that we least exercise as a muscle, right? Why is storytelling such a key tool? I want you to indulge me for a second, right? Just sort of imagine the first time you were read a story, right? Whether it was a parent, an elder sibling, it was a grandparent, but storytelling evokes a certain emotion in you. right? When we go to see a movie, when we go to see a play, when we read a book, really anything is about storytelling. In many cases, you might see the preview of the movie, so you kind of know what the story is, right? If that's all you want to take away, the preview is enough, but we want to go back and watch the whole thing because we love to be told stories too, right? It puts us in a nice warm place. It really evokes a certain emotion of trust and security. And as a product leader, that is gold, right? That is where you really want to have your customers in a way that they're engaged with your story. So storytelling is something that I think is you have an opportunity at every touch point. Every touch point with your customer is an opportunity to tell the story, right? And the more consistent the story is from your brand, the better it is. Do this exercise. How many times have you been able to look at an ad, just look at the fonts, the colors, the images, and even before they flash a logo, you knew what the brand was. And that's an example of great storytelling, right? That's an example of consistently telling, using a certain tone of message, right? And really capturing your audience. So storytelling, yes, it's an art, as the icons on the top right talk about, the creative side of your brain, absolutely. However, you'll notice there's a critical as well as an agile aspect to it as well. So let's talk about what those look like. All right. So in general, the rule of thumb is one story to one persona, right? You can use the same story for other personas for sure, but the mapping to a persona, always try and keep it to one story, right? You don't want to overcomplicate things. Stories are meant to be simple. They're meant to be memorable. And simplifying the story for that persona is very important. Many of you might already use this. This is the Greek framework, right? The ethos, pathos, and logos, right? The idea that you first come in and establish your credibility, so people would want to listen to what you're saying, and that can be done in a number of ways. But then you immediately want to really appeal to their hearts, right? How many times have you heard a product pitch that goes right into the logos, right into the left brain, the logical part of it, and you miss the mark because you failed to establish credibility, you failed to make that connection to that persona? Building conflict. This is something that movie makers do all the time. You look at ads, you look at stories, you look at plays. This is sort of the time-tested model, right? You build it up and you sort of present this before picture. You have a hero and a villain, and then you have the after picture. Building that up in your stories is super important as you appeal to your customers. This is something we talked about earlier, right? It's always start with the why, right? Then the how. The what is the least important. And yet that's the one, as product leaders, because we are so married to the product and we think that's our baby, we think that's what we want to talk about and that's what customers want to hear about, we sometimes skip over the why and the how. Speak to personal and professional pain points. This is important too. Many times you may incorrectly assume a pain point, and a lot of times, we talked about developers, for instance. A lot of times they're motivated by really being associated with the latest technologies, and just the fact that you're associated with a particular technology is what's driving them, right? Their overall experience, and maybe they're willing to put up with a little bit of not as polished user experience as others might be able to offer, just because of the fact that you're able to offer them something on their resume. Remember, purpose, not product, right? Always lead with the why, and then you go into the how and the what. Use analogies from personal experience. This is something that I think is very powerful, right? In the enterprise space, I always tend to use the example of Netflix versus the old video store, right? Because there's some great parallels there in terms of the subscription economy. So be always, even though you're in a B2B context, if you're able to build analogies that your customers can relate to right away. And again, every analogy is going to break down at some point, right? So don't overthink it. Don't try to force fit an analogy right down to the T, but as long as you're able to make a connection to your customers, help them visualize something. This is the most powerful area of storytelling, is you leave the audience with a certain vision, and people remember how you made them feel as opposed to what you said. And that's the idea behind the visualization. Now here's where the critical aspect comes in, right? Always ask, what's the big deal? Always, second guess yourself. Always feel like there's something in the story that I can improve, right? Always ask yourself, why does this matter to a customer? What's the big deal in what I'm presenting to them? How is this news? How does this make their life better? And that will help you in your storytelling, muscle. And finally, plan a surprise. Everyone loves a surprise, right? So, few tips here, but at the end of the day, I'd say this: that from a personas and a segmentation perspective, stories are extremely important, right? They help improve retention. And think about the loss in translation that happens from the first customer persona you touch to the last one in that list. There's that whole decision chain, and what you want to reduce is erosion through that decision chain, right? You want each of those personas to consistently think about one thing, typically one emotion that is related to your product, and that's the sweet spot. So that's the right side of the brain. Let's talk the left side, right? This is something, again, as marketers, we love our technology, and I think there's already they call it the Martech 8,000. This is a list of marketing technologies that has grown over time, and I think they're already talking about the 2020 version. But there's some tips here as well that can help you with segmentation and personas. We already talked about telemetry, right? Behavioral data. You may not have access to telemetry data. There may be regulations around it as well. However, there's other ways that you can gather that behavioral data, even if it's anecdotal, even if it's through surveys. Make sure that you assign points to that, right? Engagement data is a great way as marketers to be able to track that. Cookies is something that have been around for years and years. There's a new, well, I wouldn't say new, but it's a newer concept called tracking pixel. So the idea that every email that you look at, every bit of anything that you're really looking digitally at, probably has a tracking pixel, right? The idea that it's basically a 1x1 pixel that is tracking every piece of information of how you interact with the product. A lot of times UXs will actually include tracking pixels as well. So you're able to track what I call this digital exhaust, right, of your customers, and being able to assign points to that is extremely important. Lead scoring, right? This is the idea that all leads are not the same. Someone who sat through a 45 minutes webinar is much more motivated than somebody who's maybe, looked at an ad, right? So being able to sort those leads, but remember, we talked about predictive analytics, and you have tools in Martech that actually build what are called propensity models. So they look at the way that your customer has interacted with your brand thus far and interacted with associated brands, and they build a predictive score on how good a lead that particular persona might make. So using Martech to do that is a great way to help with your segmentation. Red flags, right? This is something, again, as a marketer, we live and die by these metrics, right? So click-through rate is one example of measuring how many people actually looked at your ad versus how many clicked on the ad. The industry average, I'd say, is about 3%. Technology is a little bit lower; it's about 2.5%. If you're in tourism, let's say, of course, outside of this year, if you're in tourism, it'll be a little bit higher than 3%. But industry average, I'd say, is about 3%. If you find that your CTR is lower than 2%, that's a great red flag to go and dig deep and look at your segmentation model and think about how you might be able to tweak that. The 0.25% is for display network. So this is the idea that if you have Google ads, for instance, Google might then sell the ad to a number of their network. So it's a much lower number. Usually 0.5% is a good place to be. But if it's under 0.25%, that there's some work to be done. Again, it's not all the segmentation model, but there's a good chance that you're targeting the wrong customers if you're seeing those kind of numbers. And finally, what we call source data versus engagement or intent data, right? So source data being direct data that's coming through search engines, social, tracking URLs, things like that, where you can directly see how many people actually clicked on something versus impressions and looking at CTA performance. This is one that I think some people don't use as much, but every presentation has a call to action at the end. If you're not seeing the performance you need from there, that's also an indication that you perhaps don't have your segmentation model just right, and there's some opportunity to tweak. And finally, look, data is great, right? But the human aspect will never go away, right? So always back yourself and use that agile model, right? So you have a hunch, that's your premise, and you build on that premise, right? And you use that iterative agile model to build out and do A/B testing. And there's Martech is all over that. I love the fact that engineers have completely infiltrated the marketing space, and that has actually caused this sort of paradigm shift in the way that we go about and do analytics using an engineering model. All right, so technology, great. Not always, right? So let's talk a little bit on the funnier side, right? These are just some examples of what we would call automated segmentation fails, right? So many, CRM suites will offer, automated segmentation and things like that. But again, the human element never goes away. So one example could be industry variations, right? Goodness knows, banks are full of vice presidents, right? So, and yet a director at another company might actually have much more, influence and a very, different set of needs than a VP at another company. So keeping in mind that titles are important, but you need to be able to sort of solve for some of those variations. Definitions, SMB, small, medium business. Oh my goodness, that's probably one of the most abused words, right? Because it's such a large swath of companies that land into that. One person's SMB might be another person's, mid-market or perhaps even an enterprise customer, right? Some of these SMBs can grow quite quickly. So understanding that the software will not always be able to cater to these kinds of variations, right? Language variations, things like, principal versus principal, a simple one there, but that can kind of throw off your Martech tool a little bit. Again, many of these tools are actually gotten quite sophisticated to the point that they can actually, figure out these differences. But it's important sometimes to make sure that you have data quality and you're regularly reviewing the data with a human eye. And this last one, this is my favorite. How many mangers are there that have thriving careers on LinkedIn and on Salesforce, etc. But again, you'll be surprised how much data quality drops because of things like short forms and typos. So again, having a sense that yes, you should trust the data, but always have a sanity check either through your Martech or through a human process. All right. So let's wrap things up here. I want to make sure that we leave some time for questions. So remember, we talked about a surprise, right? Here's your surprise. So when I lied about the 4 C's of marketing. You've probably heard of the 4 P's, but there is actually a 5th one, right? And the 5th one I want to talk about, I think is extremely important here, is collaboration. As product leaders, it's kind of interesting to see that I didn't really see that show up on the map. So hopefully that's a takeaway for you as product leaders. And hopefully it shows up on the cloud map when we do the poll at the end of the presentation, is collaborator, right? That is a really critical aspect, and it actually applies to all 4 of those areas of the brain. So let's quickly talk through what I mean by that. This first one, I cannot emphasize enough, right? This is bad habits that CMOs sort of spread through their organization by thinking about marketing attribution and marketing attribution only. I would like the product marketers out there to think about marketing contribution, right? Think about, as a marketer, how do you improve the overall customer experience? How are you helping your CEO achieve their business goals, right? The secondary goal is optimizing marketing spend, not the other way around. Second one, it happens all the time, right? Marketing has their own funnel. Sales has their own funnel. Marketing has their place, and sales has their own place. And that is counterintuitive. It's counterproductive, but it happens all the time. And it happens because of the first one, that marketing has not spent the time to gain that credibility from both product managers and engineering, but also the field, right? So building a single consolidated funnel, and this is much easier said than done, but if you're done right, and if you have influence to change that, and again, it's about culture, right? So I want each of you take back that culture of, I want to have a single funnel, right? And a rule of thumb here is, look at, again, this year is obviously topsy-turvy, but look at maybe last year, when things get back normal, think about at least the last 3 quarters. And if you're consistently finding that sales pipeline forecast is more than 10% away from actual revenue, there could be a segmentation problem, right? There could be a marketing mismatch there, that sales is perhaps not using all the tools available to them that marketing is able to provide. And you may not reach the nirvana of the single funnel, but if you keep that in as your end goal, you may be able to reach much more consistency and much more collaboration with sales. And finally, we alluded to this earlier, right? The routes to market. So as you're thinking about segments and you arrive at a segment that is needs based and that your product can truly help address that segment. However, as a company, you're not ready to go and fulfill the needs for the segment. That's a great opportunity for you to go to your partner organization and see if there's something that can be done there. Sometimes it's a scale thing, right? There's sort of a long tail of customers that you just don't have the resources to go service. And there's there's a whole ecosystem of folks that are available to you. But even then, you have to treat those partners like customers, right? Because they're working with a number of other partners. So what's in it for them, right? And finally, partner marketing developer fronts, MDFs. I love MDFs, right? Because especially if you're working with an established partners, they have deep pockets, right? And in many ways, you can leverage the breadth of their marketing network, the depth of their wallet, and be able to really reach customers that you otherwise would not have been able to. So as a product leader, think about routes to market as well. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up. And I appreciate everyone, sort of sitting through this. Hopefully this was helpful, valuable. I know we're right up against time here, so hopefully we'll have questions. I'm happy to stay on if you're if you're available. I do want to have I do want to complete one last slide. If I could take the screen back, Menika, just for a second. I want to just complete this one last slide here with the final word, right? So the first thing I'll say is segmentation is an outside-in exercise, right? Always think customer first and work backwards. How many times have we created segmentation models because our organization is structured that way? And that is just hurts me when I see that happening, but it happens all the time. Use the agile model. Again, we're engineers. We love the agile model. You want to keep up with trends. You want to be able to predict customer needs as well. And this is, again, something very important, right? This is the champion part of it, right? The execution part of it is suboptimal segmentation with excellent execution is any day going to beat a tremendous idea, like a lot of thought put into segmentation, but with poor execution, right? And again, the reason I say that is your segmentation will get better. Once your execution is great, you're actually going to get data that will help your segmentation using that agile model. So don't overthink it. At the same time, give it enough thought and then move on and get into execution mode. Storytellers, right? What makes a great storyteller is actually a great listener. It's almost counterintuitive because when you listen to your customers, they will tell you things that are just eye-opening, right? And just listen, be active listeners to your customers. Be maniacal about understanding your customers' needs. That's the thing I want to leave you with is your competition is for sure. You need to be maniacal. There's companies that are immensely successful, and the one thing that they do really, really well is understanding those customers. So you might be wondering what's in the box. I do have a little gift for you, right? This is a quote that originally was attributed to Theodore Roosevelt in a different context. Damon Richards made it his own, but I think it's a fantastic quote, and I want to leave that with you. And the quote is, "Your customer doesn't care how much you know until they know how much you care," right? So customer in, always be maniacal about your customers and go forth and prosper. Thank you very much.
Wow, that was such a wonderful webinar session, Irshad. I'm
Thanks,
kind of
Menika.
still taking in the whole concepts, and the quote was amazing. It was just amazing. And to be fair to the quote, we should have, given everybody few seconds at least to imbibe it completely. It makes absolute sense. So before we go on to questions, now that you have listened to Irshad's session completely, please tell us again what comes to your mind when you hear the term product leader. Please go ahead to Slido. Please take this poll. It's very important. You can scan this, or you can find the URL on your chat window. Please go ahead and take this. So the sooner you take, the sooner we can go to the questions.
I love that somebody's already picked up on the collaboration theme. So thank you. And good to see that There are some important differences between the first and the last one already. So NPS is a good way to think about it. Um, Strong stories, yes. Thank you. That's an important one, and I'm glad that we're picking up on the strength of those stories. It's incredible how you see some of these brands that have lasted many generations, and it's being able to tell those strong stories. I see Terry in chat said something about connector. That's fantastic, and that's again, I think that's a great way to think about the role of the product leader. Is you're the connector, right? You're sitting in the cockpit and you have 360 view of everything from the how the product is made, to how it's used, to how it's sold, to how we partner. So connector is a great way to characterize that. Succinct segmenter, I love that. I love alliterations. So yes, I think someone asked the question about how many segments do you target, and I think again, like I said, rule of thumb is I'd probably say about 2 to 4 is a good sort of rule of thumb. Excellent. Are we expecting more
I think we can.
responses?
I think we can move on to questions now. And thank you for your
Right.
responses. So my take from this is that people are still thinking and processing all that you have spoken about, and it's absolutely different from what we saw in the first slide, as you said. So thank you, Ashad. So
Fantastic.
let's go to the questions now. Just give me 1 second. So we have a question from Sumit Garg. He says, great session. Shouldn't use cases and marketing strategy be aligned to data gathered from personas rather than being the other way?
Yes. Great question, Smith. Thank you. And that's exactly the point that we made, right? Is it is a two-way street, right? In many cases, you're gonna. I'll give you the consultant's answer, right? It does depend, and it depends on the richness of your telemetry data, and also who are you targeting, right? In many cases, the telemetry data is targeted at the broad majority of users, right? Not necessarily the decision makers. So if you're, like I said before, a lot of enterprise companies tend to target on the relationship with the decision makers as opposed to the actual users. But that is changing. Even large vendors are paying a lot more attention to the actual users. And we're finding, for instance, DevOps and developers are great examples of that, right? They're users that give you the telemetry data, but they're also becoming very influential in the decision-making process. So and that again goes back to understanding your customers, understanding the whole customer journey, every single touch point with your customer, and to some extent, it's you're not going to be able to get all of the data from all of your customers, right? It's just going to be a deluge, and that's not optimal. But if you have an intuitive sense as a product leader, which customers to focus on and get that telemetry data, that's when you sort of marry that with the use cases. And also, remember, you're as engineers are amazing. They can build almost anything you ask them to, right? But it's about focusing their efforts on what your field and what the market dictates at that time, right? So it's important as product leaders for us to think about it in terms of two-way communication, right? The data shouldn't stop with you. It's important that you relay that back to the teams that are building products.
Thank you. We have a question from Saknik Datta. So practically, what should be our approach of targeted segments? Is a 80-20 rule way to go? Would love to hear some personal experiences.
Yeah, I think the 80-20 rule is a good rule for life in general. So I'm always a fan of that. I think it helps, separate signal from noise. I think, one example I can offer, from personal experience is the idea of, what the part of the business at Red Hat that I live under, as Monica pointed out, was cloud storage and data services. And it's this understanding that enterprise storage has drastically changed in the last 15 or 20 years, right? And as a result of that, the way that it's consumed has drastically changed. And the subscription economy has changed the way the consumers really evaluate our products. And one specific example of that I can offer to you is in the past, a typical, admin type of persona would evaluate storage vendors based off of things like data integrity, data performance, and things like that. And that has switched very much to data access and portability, right? So even if they're okay, sort of sacrificing a little bit of integrity, perhaps even performance, but if they're able to get better access to that data, that is much more valuable to them. So that is a significant shift, right? So being able to take that data point back to our engineers, back to our product managers, and make sure that that is reflected in the product, in the next iteration of the product. And here's the other thing I'll say about sort of phase lag, right? As you've taken that data back to your engineers, right? And you've talked to them about this changing persona. You moved from an admin persona to much more of a sort of a DevOps model, let's say, right? Now the engineers are doing their thing and building the product and sort of waiting to bring out the next iteration of the product. This is an opportunity for you to tell the story, right? So don't let the fact that the product isn't out there yet stop you from doing thought leadership, right? So this goes back to those shadow personas I was talking about. That's your window to go and influence those shadow personas to do thought leadership and to really build and own a certain space, right? Another example I'll give you is product categories, right? Creating a product category is extremely expensive and it's extremely difficult and it takes a lot of time, sometimes money, right? But if you realize that there is an emerging category and there hasn't quite been a persona that's attached to that category, it might be worth it, right? Back to your question about the 80-20 rule. If you figure that that's going to be 80% of our focus, that new market category, it absolutely makes sense to go and create that category. And in fact, it can yield some amazing results, right? So it is a little bit of, one size does not fit all. However, hopefully that example of sort of changing the mindset from admin to more of a developer model because of everything else that's happening, in the industry, resonates with you.
Thank you. So Irshad, we have received a lot of questions and some questions may be the same question rephrased. So I leave it to you to answer again or, add something more. There is one question from Devesh Sinha. Do we align use cases in terms of product features against each personas, and will it help target specific persona?
That's a great question. In general, I would say probably not down to the feature level. However, it's a good way to think about it, right? It's a good way to start to think about, customer needs to use cases to aspects of your product. All right. I probably wouldn't go down all the way down to the feature level because that can get very hairy very quickly, right? Because you might sort of overcomplicate things. But in general, I would say one example would be, think about the consumption model. If you have personas that very much prefer a as a service model versus personas that are used to the old school of, much more on-prem and they want much more control. Maybe that's one way to think about it is it's not so much features that you're thinking about, but it's the way that you make your product available to customers. So think about a managed service versus something that is available to your customers, on-prem. In some cases, depending, again, I think B2C, you see this a lot more, is you do have certain features that are required by certain personas. And again, it's the 80-20 rule, right? If you find enough of your users absolutely need that particular feature, then yes, I would go down to the feature level. But in general, I would say it's a good way of thinking about it is trying to map those three things together.
Great. So we have a question from Shruti. Thanks for sharing those insights. Could you please share some real-time examples of customer segments, need-based personas, and outliers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we may have covered some of this, when I was talking earlier about this move from sort of admin to developer persona. I think the outliers are really interesting, right? And when I said earlier, 2 to 4 is kind of the sweet spot. Sometimes you might have that fifth segment that is just a sort of siloed segment that's off to the side, and that really doesn't sort of fit on your in your engagement model, but they're an important customer. The way to deal with that, in my opinion, is you've got to make a big bet, right? As a company, you can't be all things to all people, and it's important that this is where I think product leadership can really make a difference. Is you have to kind of look around the corner and look at that outlier persona and go, is this going to be a niche persona going forward, or is this going to be the mainstream, right? And we've seen examples of both of those things happening, right? And the number of titles that in the past, for instance, we would target IT admins a lot, and we have found that not all IT admins are the same, and they all there's different things that drive them. There's different pain points, and there's different ways they evaluate things. So we've since moved away from sort of the typical IT admin and start to slice it up. So from an enterprise perspective, we think about it more in terms of cloud admin, for instance, or a virtualization admin, and adding some nuance to a persona that we might have sort of lumped together in the past, right? But in terms of outliers, that's a very important judgment call, and it could be a make or break judgment call for your company, right? So it's super important that, in my opinion, I would sort of steer clear of those sort of niche personas, because in many cases, the amount of effort it's going to take to close a deal that is part of that niche persona might actually be more than what's required from your mainstream persona. So to me, it's a distraction for your field. However, this is the product leadership part, right? If you're able to predict that that's where the industry is headed, and you see, and that's why being so close to customer needs is so important, and you feel like that's actually going to be the mainstream, then absolutely you should go ahead and put a lot more engineering heft around it.
Great, thank you. So, in the interest of time, can we take the last two questions and close the session? So there is one from Melvi. Irshad, how do you improve product sales when company targets firmographics and product targets need-based segmentation, given that the product is the smaller revenue segment?
Sorry, Mecca, could you repeat the question? There was a lot in there. I just want to make sure I understood the question correctly.
So Melvi is asking, how do you improve product sales when company targets firmographics and product targets need-based segmentation, given that the product is the smaller revenue segment?
Got it. Perfect. That's a fantastic question, Melvi. And again, the hope here is that you go back and see yourself as an influencer, right? This is a great example of a career opportunity where if you're able to affect that change positively, you will be seen as a leader, and you set yourself up for some real goodness down the lane in your career, right? And that's you're dealing with something that I think almost all of us have dealt with, right? Is firmographics is the easiest, it's the easy solution, it's the path of least resistance, right? It's data that's available. Usually it's pretty decently valuable and reliable data, right? However, it is the easy answer, right? And again, it's something that no one got fired for because, well, this was the data that was offered to me, right? Needs-based becomes much more of an opinion than it is data. So kudos to you for asking the question. And also for sort of, I think the best way to improve sales is know your customers, right? I can't tell you the number of times, not necessarily at RedHat, but at other vendors where even the top salespeople don't really understand the workload for the customers, right? So you may have made the sale, but when it comes to renewal, if you really don't understand what your customers are doing with the product, it's going to hurt your renewals, right? So I would say just understanding customers, right? We have built out customer advocacy programs as one example of that, right? Customers actually appreciate that. They appreciate the opportunity of having a closed room discussion that is they're sort of one-on-one with your engineering and your product manager teams to really talk about whatever is on their mind. And you'll be amazed, a 30-minute conversation, the nuggets that it will reveal. So that's one way is build out a customer advocacy program to understand the needs of your customer and don't give up, right? You have to just constantly challenge the status quo around firmographic, which is, again, I think the most predominant way of segmenting customers, and bring in this idea of needs-based segmentation. It's convincing one person at a time, but again, hopefully this session has been inspiring for you to go and make that happen at your company. Good luck.
Thank you, Irshad. I have put one last question on your chat window. This is from Sagnik Datta. Could you please take a look?
Yes, I'll read out the question. You mentioned the account-based marketing approach and working with field sales closely. Can you throw some more color on how we execute? What's the mathematical best practice to approach the effective accounts among the 1,000 existing customers? From Sagnik. Absolutely. This is a great question, Sagnik. Thank you. I'll unpack it in two ways, right? So I'll start with your second question first, which is, you've got 1,000 customers or 1,000 plus customers. How, obviously, it's not feasible to go get data from each of these customers. How do you, where do you focus? In general, I would say a good starting point is looking at revenue, right? Today, and also look at the renewal pattern, and that'll give you a sense of, let's say, the top 10%, right? So you've got 100 customers. Now, I would not just choose the top 100 revenue generating customers though, right? What I would look at is, what is your go-to-market strategy? Are you looking to be a truly worldwide brand? Are you looking to expand, let's say, EMEA operations? So that would influence which customers land in those 100, right? So perhaps take out, the bottom 20 and inject the top 20 EMEA customers that did not land in that top 100. That would be one example. Think about, what type of verticals you want to go into. For instance, healthcare right now is a vertical that is actually investing, right? Most verticals are de-investing, as you know. Telco is actually another vertical that is investing. So if you're looking to be opportunistic and move, and really, there's definitely a philanthropic aspect of helping, life sciences or a healthcare company come up with a better COVID vaccine, for instance. If that's something you want to target, then again, same exercise. So look at your top healthcare customers or life sciences customers that didn't make it into that 100, and swap them out for some more. So then now you've got this top 100 mix that represents where your company wants to go to. Remember, going back to business goals and customer experience, right? So that's one way I would do it sort of mathematically. To your account-based marketing question and working with field sales, right? Again, I like the way you're thinking about this, right? Because you're already associating the fact that field sales are probably closest to the problem, and they probably have a much better sense than someone sitting in the corporate marketing part of the company in terms of which companies to go after account-based marketing, right? So in general, I would say leave the targeting to the field sales and field marketing organization. However, what they would appreciate from you, I'm assuming you're sitting in the corporate part of the company, is a model to go execute the account-based marketing piece, right? So it is, it's email nurture. It is, believe it or not, mailers, right? So something that actually arrives in the mail that is a little surprise. A lot of times, we'll do things that are toys for kids that have some messaging thrown into it. Little things like that go a long way. But also, private events, giving the account-based marketing targets access to certain career opportunities that otherwise may not have been available to them, right? Giving them access to certain events and perhaps even information. So in many cases, we'll bring them into an executive briefing center and talk to them about product roadmaps and things like that that may not be fully public just yet. So we set up an NDA, of course, and we were able to offer them, so they were able to help with planning. So always think about as you're building an ABM, tactic, think about what's in it for the customer. What do they really care about and what drives them? And it could be, as I said before, it could be anything related to the product roadmap itself. It could be being able to enter into certain markets, serve new customers. If you're dealing with, let's say, cloud service providers or network equipment providers, folks that have customer bases themselves, they may be able to bring in new insights. So the ABM model could actually offer a conduit for you to gain those insights about their customers in turn. So that's another way I would look. So broad strokes, I would say, build out what I call the ABM in a box, right? So you put everything in from an execution standpoint, and you send it off to the field marketing and field sales teams, and let them decide how they want to kind of customize the content in the box.
Great. Thank you, Irshad. May I request you to pick the winner for the day, the best question asked?
Oh, wow. I wasn't expecting me to pick it. I was hoping you would do that, Manika.
Wouldn't be fair.
Let's go with Melvi's question. I really enjoyed that because I think it showed that Melvi has truly been inspired by something here, and they're looking to go and really change mindset, and I think that's something that is so critical, right? Changing mindset is so difficult, and yet it can be the most fruitful. So I'd say let's go with Melvi's question, and congratulations. And again, thank you for all the questions. I think they spurred some great discussion here.
Perfect. So Melvi, congratulations. Your gift will reach you quite soon. And Irshad, thank you for such a thought-provoking session. I'm still absorbing a lot of it. And please accept this certificate of appreciation from our end. So this takes you to your Hall of Fame in our webpage. So we will be.
I appreciate that.
We will be uploading your video there. And thank you so much for your time tonight. And we hope to associate with you again. We hope to have many such great sessions from you again. So thank you guys, and please join us back for our next webinar on the 24th. I'll see you in 2 days' time. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Thank you, Irshad.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.